Welcome back, guys, to Ride JBI. I'm JB. In this video, we're going to go over the compression adjuster on your rear shock. Next to me, I have a few different shocks laid out. We have a KYB shock, two Showa shock, one of WP's production shocks, and one of WP's A-kit shocks. The point of this video is to show you the shared commonalities between the compression adjuster assemblies among the three brands, and then also the unique differences among the three brands. I'm a visual learner myself, so when people explain stuff to me, it helps to see the components in visual form so you can see it. So what we're gonna do is show you guys each one, again, how they work. So we'll get right into it. And what I have next to me is a WP linkage shock from a 2023 450 SXF. This is the third generation of WP's linkage shock. And I'm gonna show you what the compression adjuster looks like on the front side and on the back side. So as you can see on this shock, here's our compression adjuster up here. And the way it works is when we compress this shock and when this shock shaft goes into the body, it's gonna push oil from this reservoir through this channel and into this reservoir. So that is how your compression adjuster works. I'll push this down for demonstration purposes. So as this shock body goes into the tube, it's taking up volume and it's pushing the oil through our adjuster into here. And our adjuster allows us to manipulate how easily the oil can transfer from this side to that side. And we're going to show you the nice details and insides of it so you get a better understanding of how they work and why certain adjusters feel the way they do. So here's the first one we got, and this is the WP one. What I also grabbed was the adjuster from the version before this. So here's your new adjuster. I have the finger clickers off of it. Here's what it looks more commonly like. And then here's the generation before that. So likely you've seen one or both of these before. On the back, it looks very similar. Kind of hard to see. I have another piston already disassembled. So you can actually see what this piston looks like on the back side. So meaning where the shims are going to cover for it. So all compression adjusters have a low speed adjustment, that's going to be that center one, and also a high speed adjustment. So here's our low speed, the flat adjuster in the center, and then our high speed is going to be adjusted by the hex. Let's see what we got. And we can adjust that with this nice 17mm wrench. Doing this one-handed might be a little tricky. There we go. So this you're used to seeing and you know. What you probably haven't seen before is how it works on the back side of the adjuster, meaning what are you actually doing when you turn that clicker? What changes and how does that affect the shock? So let's pull this thing apart. Got one right there, and we got this one here. This one has a spring. This one normally has a spring as well. It just doesn't for the demonstration of this video. But here's the first thing we're going to do. When you turn, we'll leave it on. When you turn your high speed in, we're going to compress this spring more. So I'll show you. I'm going to start turning this clicker. So as we do that, the spring that's in this area is starting to get compressed. The more we compress it, the stiffer that spring is going to be. So that is how this one works. On the other style, instead of this nice propeller that we can turn by our hand, we just have to use a tool instead, but it does the same concept. Meaning there's a spring just like this one on the back side of this, and that pushes on it. What does that push on? Is it pushes on this plate that we can see right here. So I'm going to remove some of this assembly. Here's our piston like we had earlier. Here's some shims. And here is the plate. That spring is pushing on. So when this adjuster is functioning, what happens is oil is flowing through the center of it. So that's going to be that small hole. Let me get a little pointy tool for myself. It's going to go through this small hole right here, and that hole is actually what interfaces with your clicker. That's your bypass, meaning This allows oil to go around the valving and not go through the valving itself. And that's what your low speed clicker adjusts. How much oil can go around the valving or through the valving. The more you have this clicker turned in, the earlier the oil is having to go through the valving instead of bypassing it. What I really want to point out is the differences in the high speed mechanism, because all these shocks behind me, the low speed clicker works on the same principle, meaning we have a hole, the oil is going through that hole, bypassing the valving, and with the clicker, we can adjust the volume of oil that goes through that bypass. So again, all these shocks, the KYB, the Showa Honda, the Showa Kawasaki, both the kit and the production WP shocks, we won't get into that one yet. They all work with the same principle on that, but where they are unique is the high speed adjustment. So again, this and how that mimics with the spring and what it does to the shims. As we can see, so here's the backside of our piston. The oil is going to flow through and come through this port, and this one, and this one. Doing so, normally we got a shim right there. It's going to bend that shim open for us. Let's see if I can do it this way. So now there's a lot more than one shim on the stack, but I'm trying to do this as simplified as possible to make it as easiest to understand. Supporting that shim is what we call this high-speed washer plate. Again, in a larger assembly, we can see that plate here. And on this assembly, we can see that plate there as well. So as we adjust this mechanism, we're going to change how much this spring is pushing on this shim. Now the main takeaway I want to take is this shim, it covers these holes perfectly. We call this a face shim, meaning it's the first shim that goes against the piston, and it is the exact diameter you need it to be to cover the holes and seal it. Now our high-speed washer that goes with it, or high-speed plate, it covers that shim completely. So this shim is 22 millimeters, meaning if we measure the outside diameter, this plate is 22 millimeters. It covers that shim perfectly. So what I'm getting at is when you adjust the high-speed mechanism on your WP shock, it is very effective because of where it is assisting or applying additional pressure to, meaning in what part of the shim stack. So now that we've talked about that one, let me set this one aside, and we're going to dive into one of these Showa ones next to me. So this is a rear shock from a 2019 and 2023 KX450. And this is a Showa shock. From previous generations, they had a much smaller adjuster. In 2019, they came out with a much larger adjuster. You can see much bigger size and diameter. Same design and everything, just a bigger piston for it. So I just wanted to show that, and here's what we got. So just kind of similar to this one. We got the backside of a piston here. This one looks a little different though. You can see that we got 6 holes and a center hole. So our center hole here is still what interfaces with our compression low speed clicker, but these 6 holes on the outside is what interfaces with our high speed adjuster. So already you can see the, let's say, difference in piston geometry. Here's the Showa piston. Here is a WP one. But I want to give you more apples to apples comparison because this one's small. So on these, this is new Showa shock with the bigger adjuster. It actually has a much bigger piston. Looks like this guy. So the geometry of the piston is quite different between a WP shock and a Showa one. And then let's also check out the mechanism that supports the shims. So this is just the piston. This is the same piston but assembled with shims behind it, meaning how it would look if I pulled out this piston as is and didn't disassemble it anymore. So with that, this is our high speed plate. We'll fit that right here. As we can see, look in here, the plate sits much farther on the shim stack. So let's measure this. What I mean by that is the shims that cover the face of these holes, those measure 23 millimeters in diameter. But where our high speed adjuster plate and the spring pushes on is actually further down on the shim stack. It's going to be more around the 19 millimeter shim for it. So logically, we can deduct that since this is farther away from the most active shims, the farther away we get from the piston, the less influence the shim has on the assembly, in the most simple way of putting it. So this isn't pushing on the shims directly on the face of the piston. This is a few removed. So logically, you can dictate that, or deduct, that this style of compression adjuster, the high speed, is not going to be as influential or provide as much additional compression as the WP one, where it pushes on the face shims that are tied to the piston for it. Now we've talked about that one a little bit. Here's the last one we got, and this is our KYB shock. This is from a 2024 Yamaha YZ450. This is coated, so it looks a little different aesthetically, but it is the same adjuster. And this has been the same adjuster for a very long time. So let's take this one apart. First, I'll show you the backside. Let's check out its ass. Looks
check it.
Good call. So as you can see, already the Showa adjuster and the KYB adjuster are very similar. They look very similar in just the design of them and just the geometry of the pistons. We got the 6 holes, we got the 6 holes. So let's pull this one apart and take a look at how this one works. So here's our adjuster spring. Again, same exact mechanism for low speed. Here's our center clicker. Here is our center hole. This one's cool because we can assemble it without this cage. So here's our clicker. When we turn this either way, we're dictating how much oil can go through the center of this and then come out some of these side holes right here. So now that you can kind of get a visual on it, hopefully this helps you kind of better visualize what's happening in your shock as you adjust it and as you ride. So again, that style of adjustment, the low speed compression, is pretty much identical on all the brand shocks. It is the high speed that we're focusing on. So let's pull that back out. Come here. This is the spring. You can see it's a lot fatter and shorter than some of the other ones. Let's grab this WP one. This spring, the coil diameter is a lot smaller, so this is a much stiffer spring than this one, but I'll show you why. So for our KYB shock, here is the high-speed adjuster plate. And let's look on, so here's our shim stack on the back of it. Let's look at what shims it pushes on. So this one pushes the furthest away from the piston. So again, our compression adjuster from WP, this plate is pushing on the shims that go directly against the piston. On our Showa setup, this one is sitting a few shims away. It's on the 19 millimeter instead of the 23. So not quite at the face shim, but a few back. So still active and providing a good amount of additional compression resistance. But this one is the farthest away from the shims, meaning here's the shims against the piston face, and we got a nice gap between that. So this does have the stiffest spring by far, but the shim that this is adding, let's say, compression resistance to is the farthest away. So with that in mind, a lot of people have learned, especially on the KTMs, that if they reduce the high-speed compression damping on their shock, the shock tends to feel a lot better. Reason being for that is to call this style of adjuster a high-speed comp adjuster is kind of misleading, because the way it is working and interacting with this assembly, it's providing more of a low speed and mid-speed damping resistance than what we would really consider a high speed. That's why this has such an influential effect over how good or bad your shock can feel. In my opinion, this style is a little bit of overkill, meaning it's contributing way too much. The KYB style is contributing way too little. What I mean by that is, from our experience in testing and rider feedback, is we have found that riders are much less susceptible to changes on the high speed adjustment on KYB shocks than they are in comparison to the WP or Showa shocks. I'm not saying you can't feel a difference. I'm saying in comparison to the other style of adjusters. And that's the important takeaway, is what we are referencing. So what we have found from testing and rider feedback is usually the most preferred adjuster is the Showa one. I think that has to do with, again, they all work with the same low speed compression style mechanism, but it has to do with where they located their high speed spring and the plate that's going to assist the shims with additional resistance. They don't have it very early on in the shim stack. They don't have it in the back. They kind of got it right in the middle. And that seems to be the best place for creating a high speed adjuster for it. What I have back here is a kit shock. And what's cool is these shocks always have two separate adjusters. They split them up. So what I mean by that is instead of having a low speed center clicker like this, they just made an entire clicker on its own low speed, hence the L. And there's no other clicker. And instead of this hex that does the high speed adjustment, they have a separate one labeled H, and that just does high speed adjustment. Here's what they look like on the back side. And I'm gonna lay out the WP one here to help give you guys some good visual references. So here's our high speed spring. Here's the high speed spring in here. This is the high speed spring plate. We can see the same one here. Now, if we look, we're gonna see that this plate is pushing on the face shims, just like this one is. So same design as that, different color. Again, for the low speed clicker, you can see there's just a simple hole in the center of this. There's nothing else around this at all. So all this clicker is doing is you're managing how much oil can flow through the center of this before the oil, has to start flowing through these 6 holes. Because that's what happens when you ride. The oil takes the easiest path, which is going to be through the center. But at all times, it's applying pressure on these 6 holes here against the shim stack, and it's trying to open that shim stack. So the WP split adjuster is them just taking this and splitting it up into 2 adjusters for that. So this one, very simple. Again, it has their check valve feature built into it. You can see this shim. See if I can get underneath it. It might be a little hard to do. But on here, it's this shim. Sorry, there we go. That's so the shock can backflow with oil. So with one adjuster, they could incorporate low speed, high speed, and the return for it, the return check plate. WP felt that they could do a better job by separating the 2 adjusters to have more isolated mechanisms. One thing I did notice was during Supercross, Chase Sexton was running a kit shock they have not released yet that looked like their kit shock, but it had this style of adjuster on it instead of the 2 separate adjusters for it. What I really want to point out is on this kit shock, even though we have 2 different adjusters here, the key takeaway is look at our high speed adjuster. It's got 6 holes on the outside. What else is that very similar to? Well, that looks a lot like our KYB high speed piston, and it looks a lot like our Showa high speed piston for it. If we start to look at shocks and look at the shared similarities that they have and then some of the differences, we'll see that a lot of the shocks, Yamahas or KYBs, Showas, and WPs have a lot more things shared than they do different. But when it comes to the OEM WP shock, you'll notice that their compression piston, where the fuck did it go, is a massively different design on the OEM shock than it is compared to the Japanese shocks or even their kit shock. So I think there's a lot of potential in possibly changing out the design of this piston and some unique valving to go along with it as well, because we've already seen how well the WP kit shocks work. And the biggest differentiator on those is this high-speed piston. So I think if somebody were to go ahead and maybe make a new piston for these WP ones, you could start to get some very similar kit level results with your OEM shock. So I kind of want to go through and just show you guys what they look like. and how they work. Because again, I'm a visual learner, so it helps me to see something in action, see the back sides and the insides of it. So that way when I'm adjusting stuff and working on it, I feel like I can give riders and tuners better feedback because I have a better understanding of actually what's taking place. So hopefully this video is helpful for you guys to getting just a visual and a clear understanding of what's happening on the inside of your adjuster as you manipulate it. Any questions you got, please drop in the comments and let us know about how we can maybe further expand upon this and explain this even better. Or if you have specific questions about your setup as well, let us know. So thank you guys for watching this. And we're going to keep getting out some more technical info video for you guys. Those seem to be well received. Let us know if you have any other ideas or topics you'd like us to touch on.